I am Lee Rambo Kemp, First Vice President of the League of Women Voters of Orange County, and on behalf of the League, I'd like to welcome each of you, our members, guests, both in person and online, who have joined us this morning for our program today. Today's program is being streamed live on our League's Facebook page, and the recording will also be available later in the week on our YouTube channel and on the Hot Topics webpage. Before we move on, just a reminder, if you have not already done so, please silence your mobile devices. Before we do the pledge, I'd just like to take a moment to honor someone who's been very important to the League over the years. Andrea Corbin recently passed, and for those of you who do not know her, she, along with Ann Helmuth, who's here, co-chaired the Hot Topics Committee for many years and made it into the successful program that it's become today. So we really thank her for her work, and I'd just like to ask for a moment of silence. Thank you. If you'll now join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We're going to roll right into the introduction of our elected officials and candidates who have filed and are running for office. So I'd like to invite anyone who is an elected official to come to the side mic over to my left, as well as candidates who are running for office. If you would introduce yourselves, your name, and the office and title you are running for. Thank you. We'll wait for Anna to put her plate down.
Good morning. My name is Warren Lindsay. I'm running for Winter Park City Commission.
Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year.
All right.
My name is Ana V. Escamani, proudly serving as your State House Representative for District 42 in the Florida Legislature, where I'm serving my final term of 8 years. And of course, recently announced my bid for Orlando Mayor in 2027.
Hello, I'm Robin Dellinger. I'm from Seminole County, and I'm a newly elected school board member. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Melissa Vickers, and I am your new public defender for Orange and Osceola.
Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Vanos. I'm the school board member for Orange County Public Schools, proudly representing District 6.
It is so good to see so many League members in office. I'm now delighted to introduce and announce our sponsors. First, our bronze sponsor, the Honorable Cynthia McKinnon and her husband Alex. Our silver sponsors, Lynn and David Berelsman, who cannot be with us this morning. We do have the Voting Voices team of Charlie Williams, Michelle Levy, Lori and Richard Wack, and did I leave out anyone? No. And our visionary sponsor and matching campaign leader, Jennifer and Phil Anderson. Jennifer, and will everybody who's here who's a sponsor, please stand. We'd like to thank you and acknowledge you. voting voices, are you being shy this morning? Okay. If any of you are interested in becoming a sponsor, I'd welcome a conversation with you, or you can email me at vp@lwvoc.org. And to all of our donors, our donor level members, and our growing number of people who are joining our new giving society, I'd just like to personally thank each and every one of you for participating in our programs, for helping to support our work, and to make it the success we are today. We ended the calendar year better fortified to approach 2025, and we will need all the fortification we can drum up for what we think we might be facing, including some of the tailwinds of immigration. So thank you for helping us to push forward and advocate for all of the issues and values that we hold so dear. Now, before we begin our program, I'd like to introduce and give a few minutes to Sadie Holzmeyer, who is in charge of our Digital Democracy Project, a very exciting program. Sadie?
And yeah, I want to thank the League for letting me make this quick announcement. My name's Sadie. I'm the Executive Director of the Digital Democracy Project's Florida chapter. And for those that aren't familiar, Digital Democracy Project is a nonpartisan nonprofit. We provide a free platform where voters submit their votes on the same bills as their legislators, so we can tell them how we want them to be voting. We're trying to get as many voters as we can so we can have more influence. And then we also generate legislator scorecards where we post how every legislator votes on each of the bills. We compare it to how the voters wanted them to vote so that we can hold them accountable at election time. So we'll start carrying state level bills this weekend. If you want to grab one of the cards at your table, it'll show you how to sign up for the free mobile voting app where you submit your votes, and then on the website we'll post all the results. And if you guys have any questions or anything at all, definitely reach out, and I have a table, some business cards over there, so find me afterwards. But yeah, we definitely want to get everyone voting and engaged, so thank you.
Sadie has developed an amazing way for people like me who don't take or have the time to do all the research. She makes it very easy to find it all in one place, so it's great. Yesterday in the House, we saw the bipartisan passing of the Laken-Riley bill. That measure to deport unauthorized immigrants convicted of petty crimes appears to be on a fast track to enactment in the Senate later this week. And this may be, and probably will be, the first salvo of a rash of legislation targeting undocumented immigrants. On a number of levels, it's really ironic that in the U.S., a nation of immigrants, is there anybody in this room who's a Native American? A nation of immigrants. Immigration has become the top priority, or one of the top priorities, for our incoming president. What will happen if the promise of mass deportation becomes a reality? How will this play out, and what is the potential impact on our nation in Florida, and particularly in Central Florida? To take a look at how Central Florida and its residents may be impacted by this incredible move, I am so pleased to introduce our moderator and anchor, Nancy Alvarez. Ms. Alvarez is a bilingual journalist and anchor of WESH TV, who brings more than 20 years of broadcasting at the anchor desk and in the field, covering the biggest stories in our nation and in Central Florida. From South Florida, Nancy is the daughter of Cuban immigrants, and she is well known for her work in the community, hosting political debates, participating in the annual Puerto Rican Day Parade, as well as supporting many civic and nonprofit organizations. Among them were the Heart of Florida United Way, Latino Leadership, and the Hope Community Center of Apopka. Please join me in giving a big welcome to our anchor, Nancy Alvarez.
Thank you, Lee, for that introduction. Thank you so much for having me, everyone. Happy New Year. I don't think it's too late to say that, right? I so appreciate the opportunity to participate in this discussion today. I am so looking forward to this event that really is going to be, I think, mostly about education and about really hearing new and different perspectives on this issue. I want to briefly share with you, because I was asked to, it's not about me, but I want to talk very, very briefly about my own experience. I am a lot of things, right? Like many of you. I'm a lot of things. I'm a mom, I'm a daughter, I'm a journalist, I'm a sister. But one of the things I am most proud of in my life is that I am the daughter of immigrants. I grew up in a bilingual, bicultural household. I live truly the best of two worlds. It is truly the greatest thing about my life, and it is a 24/7 effort to continue that with my children. And I think one of the reasons that I have succeeded as being the daughter of immigrants is that when my parents came from Cuba in the early 60s, right after Fidel Castro, there was a process in place for them. There was a process in place for them. There was paperwork and hurdles and sacrifice and a lot of hardship. But there was a process, and I truly believe that process is what laid the foundation for the success of my family. My parents raised 3 children, several grandchildren. I literally lost the count. I'm not going to sit here right now and count my nieces and nephews. But we have all gone on to have careers in our communities. My brother is a 30-year veteran of law enforcement. I consider myself a public servant in my community. My parents never really mastered English. You know, my dad was a welder by trade his entire life. But our first generation here in this country, we are contributors in big ways in our communities. We are participants, and we are the product of immigrants, once again, that had a process in place. And so I don't think there's any debate on the importance of that process and how incredible those results can be if we have it. Because I'm standing here as living proof that it can happen. So, thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this important and educational conversation. I am so excited and proud to introduce to you our panel. We begin with the incomparable Felipe Sousa-Lazaballet. He serves as the executive director of the Hope Community Center. A proud immigrant from Brazil and LGBTQ plus advocate, Felipe's lived experiences have shaped his mission to empower marginalized communities and build solidarity for systemic change. Before joining Hope, Felipe held key leadership roles, including advocating for LGBTQ plus inclusion and immigrant rights as the Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Senior Specialist for the City of Orlando. Welcome, Felipe, and thank you for being here. Remember when they said in my intro that I've been doing this for 20 years? It's been 25. And last year, I started to use these. I can't see. So we've grown up together, Central Florida, and we're growing old together too, because I cannot see this paper. What happened? What happened, Felipe? Okay. Up next, Gisselle Martinez is the legal director and co-founder of Orlando Center for Justice. Since 2013, Gisselle has been representing the most vulnerable immigrant clients in front of various immigration agencies and courts. Today, she manages and supervises the growing legal team at the OCJ. Gisselle is the chair of the Pro Bono Committee for American Immigration Lawyers Association of Central Florida. An immigrant herself, Gisselle is passionate about immigrant rights. Thank you for being here. Up next, a fellow journalist, McKenna Schueler, is a staff reporter for Orlando Weekly, who covers the workers' rights, politics, and other social and economic justice issues. Prior to her job with the Weekly, McKenna worked as a freelance reporter and part-time news anchor for the independent radio station WMNF 88.5 FM in Tampa. She's also written for national and regional publications such as In These Times. McKenna, thank you for being here and for the insight that you'll bring to our panel today. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Alexis Tsoukalas joined Florida Policy Institute in 2019, focusing on state immigrant and labor issues, and is currently a senior policy analyst. She holds a Master of Social Administration Social Work from Case Western Reserve University and a PhD in Public Affairs from the University of Central Florida. Alexis was a state policy fellow with the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, CBPP, and co-chair of CBPP's State Policy Advisory Committee. So thank you, Alexis, as well, for being here. Our timekeeper is right there in red. You can't miss her, and she has a very important job here today. We have a lot to cover and a lot to talk about, so please keep an eye on her so we can cover as much as we possibly can. And as we talk, I want you guys to remember we want to include you. You're going to have an opportunity to ask some questions, so please do. We want to hear what you think and what you have to say or what you want to know. We have a very informed panel here and a lot to discuss. So I want to begin with this first question, which may seem a little basic, but I feel like I personally asked if I could ask this, because it is a term that we have all, I think, heard over and over again, and one I say on the news all the time. Mass deportation. What does that even mean? What does that look like? Do we even know at this point? So I'd like to open that up to any of you who would want to talk about that. It sounds really scary, and whether you're an immigrant family or not. But let's talk about that term and what that could look like in this country.
Okay, so I think I can speak a little bit about the subject. When I hear the term mass deportations, it's a little iffy because you cannot just get up and deport everybody, right? There's millions of immigrants here, there's millions of undocumented immigrants, unfortunately, and it's gonna be impossible to deport everyone. The first type of people that they're gonna be able to easily deport is people who already have a deportation order, but that's not the majority of immigrants, right? But if you already have a deportation order and you remain here in the United States, you're likely you're the low-hanging fruit to be able to be deported, right? But then we have immigrants who don't have a deportation order. They're here, maybe undocumented. They don't have any status, but they don't have a deportation order, and those people cannot easily be deported. Most of them have to go through a deportation process in immigration court. So what I think is going to happen is not so much mass deportations as mass detentions, because a lot of these people are going to be able to have their day in court, but they're going to be, hopefully not, but they're likely going to be detained. I think that they're already going to start building detention centers where the people are going to be detained while they wait their day in court. So that's what I think. I think it's we're going to see more of mass detentions rather than mass deportations.
And mass detentions also means mass separations.
Exactly, right? People are going to be detained in detention centers, not going to be able to be with their families, have to maybe hire immigration attorneys to help them get out of detention. And a lot of them are going to get tired because people in they're not used to being in a detention center or in a jail. So they're going to get tired, might have to even self-deport. They're going to get tired and go back to their country. So it's going to be a really sad situation.
So let's talk about how things are on the ground, right? Because we have folks here with us today who are doing that work, right? Face to face with the very families impacted by all of this. So the next question is for you, Felipe and Gisselle as well. With your close contact with undocumented immigrants, what are you seeing? The president-elect is just days away from taking office, and we really don't know exactly what this will look like. What are you seeing on the ground day in and day out?
Well, first of all, hello everyone. It's so nice to be here with you, and thank you for making your way here, because you're here because you care, and you are the chosen ones. This is what I believe. Look, I am an immigrant. I came to the United States when I was 14 years old, and I was undocumented for 15 years of my life. I know what it's exactly like to get in that car without a driver's license and thinking, maybe this is my last day here today. To graduate from high school, cross the stage not knowing whether I could go to college. I lived that life. And that life is still part of my life. I'm part of an immigrant family. I'm part of a mixed status family like many other Floridians in the state. This last Christmas was so difficult because it felt like it could have been the last time that we could be together. That could have been the last time that we could touch each other across the table and say, Merry Christmas. That is exactly what it's like on the ground. Our families are living in anxiety. Our families are living in fear. And let me remind you that we are everywhere. We're actually over 22% of the population of Orange County. We're over 300,000 people who are living right next to you. And those are the conversations that we were having during the holiday season.
Gisselle, if you want to talk about that a little more?
As Felipe says, immigrants are afraid. They're calling our office asking what options do they have. They're really scared. My clients want me to file the cases right away because they don't know what's going to happen, right? They want some sort of safety or security, have some application pending, but not everyone has the money or the time to be able to hire an attorney to help them right now. So they're afraid. They're very afraid.
Felipe, you alluded to the number in Orange County just now, but let's dig a little deeper into that and really give us a picture of how many undocumented people live in Florida now and what are some of the ways they contribute to our economy and otherwise. Let's dig a little deeper into those numbers so we can really paint a picture of how many people we're talking about here.
Absolutely. There is about 1.2 million undocumented immigrants in the state of Florida. We're about 50% of the agricultural labor force. We're a major contributor to the hospitality service community. And our children, like Ana Escamani, become elected officials, like Nancy Alvarez, become the anchors of WESH too. And we have dreams. And we have aspirations. When I came to this country, I came with a broken suitcase and a heart full of dreams. I still remember what that was like. My story is not an exception, it's actually the rule. We want to be here, we want to contribute, and look, I can turn around just like right here and give some clear examples of the kind of impact that we can continue to have in this country. I think Alexis wanted to talk a little bit about that too.
Oh, thank you. I'll just add to that. So those numbers are, we know anywhere from 750,000 to, as you said, well over 1 million undocumented people in the state of Florida. As you can imagine, it's hard to get accurate numbers from a group of people who rightfully so distrust authority and, someone coming around to ask what their status is. But I think what's also important to point out is when you look at the latest data from the federal government itself, we see that this notion that there is this growing threat in Florida, this wave of immigrants, is actually not true. Every year, the number of undocumented people significantly goes down in the state, and for various reasons, people leave, they decide to get citizenship, and so forth. But I think it's important to push back on that narrative somewhat as well. So Texas and New Jersey, I would say, are the exceptions. They have seen some increases, but definitely not here in Florida, and that's been a trend. The other thing I'd like to point out is that over 64% of undocumented immigrants age 60 and over, basically working age, are in the labor force. So that's a majority. So definitely contributing to our economy in those ways. But I think what's also interesting is when you look at the numbers compared to non-immigrants in the workforce, it's actually lower. The share of people, I think, is something like 56%. So these are all, not that we want to pit groups against each other, but this is just for context and to kind of understand a little more when people say unfortunate and disparaging things about immigrants in our state.
Yeah, and we're going to dig a lot deeper into the labor force and the economic impact and all of that in just a moment. But to keep us kind of on track, I do want to touch on, we hear over and over again about how complicated this issue is, and it is. It is so complicated, multiple layers, and we'll talk about that as well. But one of the most complicated things is this issue with families with mixed status. And Felipe, you talked about it already a little bit. Let's talk about that and truly dig deeper into what changes could mean for these families with mixed status and what sweeping deportation orders could mean for them. And this is for Alexis and Felipe.
It's a big question.
Yeah.
Maybe first define what mixed status is for those who don't know.
Yeah, that's great.
Yes. So essentially a mixed status family is a family that has folks who have different immigration statuses, which includes U.S. citizen, undocumented, maybe temporary protective status, deferred action for childhood arrivals. I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
Can I interrupt you with that? Is the most common mixed, I don't know the answer, is the most common mixed status scenario we see is children in Orange County Public Schools whose parents are undocumented. Can you kind of just key in on that?
Absolutely. So there are both U.S. citizens who are married to undocumented people, about 700,000 of them in Florida. And I was just checking the numbers. There's over 3 million Floridians who are in mixed status families across the entire state. A lot of them are children. So when a detention happens, it happens suddenly. You went to work, there was a work raid, you didn't come home. Your kid is at home, no one knows what's happening. DCF comes, picks up your kid, and you lose the right to your children because you couldn't show up to court because you were detained. And I want to say that detention centers are prisons. They are not, I hate the name because it doesn't really give justice to what truly is. So then now we have a situation which you have a child who was born in the United States, who all of a sudden doesn't have a home, doesn't have parents, and are at risk. As we all know, the foster care system is not necessarily a great place for a child to grow up. So that's the situation, and that's what's really at the heart of this issue. Real people, real families.
Alexis, if you can speak further on that.
I mean, I think Felipe covered most of it. The only thing I'll say is we also know that at least 1 in 4 undocumented Floridians live with a child under 18 who is a U.S. citizen. So you can imagine, just to illustrate what Felipe was saying further, that if you are living in a mixed status household, but now it's one thing if you are detained together, but we are really, really concerned about family separation. We already have a really disgusting history of that in our country. And that's absolutely going to be a reality if these policies move forward.
If you don't know about the Hope Community Center in Apopka, who doesn't? Who does? Who does? Who does know about the Hope? Okay, most of you do. Good, that's wonderful. Then you know about the work that they do on the ground. And it's invaluable. And you heard me begin this whole conversation about how my family was so lucky to have a process in place during the time that my parents immigrated here. And I think the Hope Center in Apopka has worked to fill the gap in those processes. It's everything, as you guys know, from English classes to job placement to legal assistance to you name it. The list goes on. And Felipe, I know that you guys have taken on even more work now because of all these issues. So can you talk about some ways your organization is preparing people for what's to come?
Absolutely. So we serve about 20,000 people every year. I joke a lot because every single time I see our annual report, I look at it and I think to myself, well, that's why we're so tired all the time. So we're working all the time. We have launched a process, which I call it the first responders, which, by the way, all of you can be part of. We are teaching our community members to teach others about their constitutional rights. And additionally, actually, tomorrow night, we're going to be doing a trainers about what we call it the dignity plan, which is about family preparation in the case of a sudden detention, so children don't get left behind, so they don't lose their property, already. So they have all of the preparations, which is, by the way, heart-wrenching, because we're sitting with the family, with the mother, and saying, do you have a plan for your kid? And then help her create it. And you can be part of that process. I know that someone here is actually a volunteer in our citizenship program. We have many ways that you can get involved. And I want to say just one last thing. We are here with the League of Women Voters, right? Because this organization exists, so all of us can have a pathway to thrive instead of barely survive. Some of us have the right to vote, some of us do not. So for all of y'all, my request is not only for you to vote, but in the upcoming next election, for you to bring 100 with you.
I mentioned that we're going to talk about the economy, right, and about our labor force. Let's talk, Alexis, a little bit about what businesses undocumented workers most likely work in. I think we know here in Central Florida the answer. And as a follow-up, if a working family member is detained, let's talk a little bit more about what that means economically for families.
Yeah, on that second part, I'm gonna probably pass it to my fellow panelists, including Felipe, but I'll say this is true across the country, but especially so in Florida. So top industries, we pointed this out when we were pushing back against the 2023 law, SB 1718, a sweeping anti-immigrant law. So most undocumented people in Florida that we know of are working in fields like construction, also professional fields, managerial, administrative roles. So besides being managers, that can include laborers, landscaping positions, and administrative assistants. And then the third largest industry would be hospitality and leisure, of course. So our food services, our hotels, our restaurants, and that. So you can imagine those are all very pivotal to our economy, and significant impacts would occur if we suddenly say, actually, you're not allowed to contribute and to live in our communities. And the fourth group, I'll say, they're significant in terms of numbers, and Felipe talked about this, are agricultural workers. So we don't have great reliable estimates on the numbers. It's anywhere from 60,000 to 200,000 here in Florida, given seasonal employment, but they are disproportionately made up of people who are undocumented and prone to so much exploitation, and we absolutely rely on them. And, you know, ag is Florida's #2 industry. We need it to thrive. So the overall message is, you know, we need immigrants, regardless of what the federal government labels their documentation status, to be a thriving state and society.
Do you want to add on that, Felipe?
For every dollar that we bring into the state, think 9 votes, right? We are contributing. Let me just begin by saying we actually pay back to the state of Florida and your local taxes $1.8 billion. So the myth that undocumented people do not pay taxes is simply a lie. Simply a lie. And additionally, we are, again, in every sector of society. We could be the person who is taking care of your mom. We could be the person who is taking care of your kid. And believe it or not, we love your family dearly. And when we come home, we talk about your family to our families, and we see each other. We are human. At the end of the day, this is not a red or blue issue. This is a human issue, and it requires all of us in Central Florida to understand our true calling in this moment. What I always say is that in Central Florida, D&I is part of our DNA. We know what it's like. We understand the contributions of our diverse communities, and most importantly, we know the role that we can all collectively play to create the kind of democracy and the kind of community that we all deserve.
Right. McKenna, I'm sorry I haven't gone to you more. We're turning this around now. You have done some great work. You recently wrote about an effort by the hospitality lobby to gain exemptions for unauthorized workers. So let's talk a little bit more about that story and why various industries are seeking ways around the Florida immigration law that went into effect in 2023. Maybe you can explain that as well for folks. And it's important, I think, to point out that oftentimes it seems that the anti-immigrant rhetoric doesn't really match the business needs, the realistic needs of businesses, not just in our state, but across the country.
Yeah, so I think as our other panelists have mentioned, hospitality is one of the top industries where immigrant workers and documented workers are more highly concentrated, and it's particularly pivotal here in Central Florida with our theme parks and other tourist attractions. And this past year, during the 2024 legislative session, we definitely saw a concerted push, particularly by the hospitality and construction industries, to find ways to ease labor shortages that probably pre-existed SB 1718, the 2023 law, but were definitely exacerbated by that. So as you mentioned, I wrote a story about an effort by the hospitality industry in particular, a proposal they had that would have essentially created a pathway for unauthorized or undocumented workers to legally work in Florida through sort of creating a temporary permit program where they would provided they met certain eligibility requirements and paid a fee. The proposal was spearheaded by specifically the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association, representing the hospitality industry. And they titled it the Essential Worker Act, really kind of highlighting how important these workers are to our communities, and tellingly kind of acknowledging that the industries themselves know this. But if the proposal sounds unfamiliar, it's because it actually never came to light. I only discovered it through email records I obtained through a public records request between lobbyists and state lawmakers. So right before session started, it was actually stalled, or they decided to just kind of backtrack. And instead, the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association specifically decided to back a push to ease Florida's child labor laws to allow older teenagers to be able to work more hours and such. So that was that.
Can you give us a little bit more in terms of your reporting on, who you spoke to for that story? Is there any effort to bring it back? Is there any more work being done on that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So of course I reached out to the chief lobbyist who was involved in these email records that I did obtain. And when I reached out to her, she did respond, but she declined to say whether it was going to come up again, because she mentioned that I reached out to her in December, so she said they were still kind of finalizing their legislative priorities. But she did not deny my characterization of the proposal, specifically to create that legal pathway for undocumented workers to legally work in her industry and others. But what was interesting was in those email records, while she would not tell me definitively whether they would bring it back, in those emails from roughly December 2023, she mentioned that they would like to. So I would definitely be curious to see if something like that is brought up again.
Okay. We want to move on to talk about TPS, Temporary Protected Status. No shame here. Who knows exactly what that is? Right. Exactly. Did you have it at one point, Anna? No. No. But, we talk about this issue, right? And we talk about how complex it is. One of the most important things related to this immigration conversation is this temporary protected status, and most people don't really even understand it and what it means. The U.S. currently provides TPS, temporary protected status, to about 863,880 foreign nationals from 16 different countries. Florida has the largest share, with almost 300,000, and this is all according to the Immigration Forum. So, Gisselle, if you could talk to folks a little bit more about what it is exactly and what recourse exists if the president wants to end TPS for some countries.
Sure. So TPS is a temporary benefit granted by the Department of Homeland Security to people from certain countries. The way they designate these countries is if the nationals of that country are unable to return to that country because it's not safe. So it could be a natural disaster, it could be there's internal conflict going on in the country. So for example, in 2011, Haiti was designated after the earthquake. In 2021, I think Venezuela, because of the ongoing economic and political conflict going on in the country. So the benefit that it gives is a temporary work permit to these immigrants to be able to work in the United States as long as the country continues to be designated. If the country is no longer designated, they are not longer able to continue renewing their work permit. It does not provide a pathway to citizenship. It does not provide a pathway to legal permanent residency, unfortunately. It's just a work permit that they're able to renew every few years. What happened before? In 2017, actually, the Trump administration did remove the designation of a few countries, a handful of countries like El Salvador, Honduras. He removed the designation. But the ACLU and other organizations were able to sue the government, and it was there's an injunction on this termination of the designation up until he left office. So nothing happened at the time, but I think this time around they're going to be a lot smarter on how to remove the TPS designation for certain countries, and that's a problem. So what can we do? Hopefully it's organizations like the ACLU are going to be able to sue the government again and are going to be somewhat successful at this. Another option is to advocate in Congress for legislation. Maybe there could be a more secure pathway for these people. And the other recourse that they have as immigrants is going to be for them to talk to an immigration attorney for an opinion on what is a plan B. What other resources do they have? What other sort of applications? Is it an asylum? Is it a family petition that they can apply for to be able to have a more permanent pathway? But not everyone is going to have the ability to do so.
When you talk about immigration attorneys and the work that could be facing so many of these people and these families, one of these notes here as I prepared for this event that stood out, I didn't know this. Florida only has 2 immigration courts.
Correct.
2 for our entire state. So let's talk about, Gisselle, some other ways that could put legal barriers in front of immigrants seeking citizenship, because let's not forget that in this entire process, we have immigrants here who are in the middle of this process. Can I tell you that, as a side note, this doesn't matter, but just for a moment of levity, one of my favorite memories of my childhood is preparing my mom for her citizenship exam and asking her who the first president of the United States was. You know what she said? Jorge Washington. I'll never forget that. I'm like, his name is not Jorge, it's George. I know, but it's so Jorge. I'm like, oh my God. Anyway, just wanted to provide a moment of levity. But, so yeah, anyway, I went through this process with my mom, and I remember it, and I didn't know Florida only has 2 immigration courts. I mean, how are we even going to get this done for folks that need this work done?
Exactly. So there's going to be many barriers coming for immigrants, one of them being the immigration court. So right now, there's priorities that the Biden administration had set forth of who is an enforcement priority. They have specifically made people who have a criminal record, who are a threat to the safety of the United States, as a priority for deportation or for enforcement. Last time around, last Trump administration, this is the first thing they did was remove those priorities and make every undocumented immigrant a priority. And this, what does it cause? It causes that all those immigrants are going to be detained, are going to be placed in removal or deportation proceedings. And like she says, there's only 2 immigration courts in Florida. The Orlando Immigration Court has 250,000 pending cases right now. So imagine the backlog that this is going to cause going forward. Not only that, but I have cases since 2014, 2015, asylum cases, people who are trying to do the right thing and apply for their benefit. I'm still waiting. Almost 10 years later, I'm still waiting for them to have their day in court or for them to have a decision on their case. And then besides that, what happened last time around, last Trump administration, is that what I call the administrative warfare against us. So as immigration attorneys, we were having to fight just changes, little changes in the rules and the law every single week. Little things. Immigration law is very form-based, so you fill out a form so that you can apply for those benefits. Little mistakes in the form was being rejected or the case was being denied, and we are trained attorneys, right? We're a nonprofit organization. We provide services for the last 10 years. We're trained attorneys. Imagine an immigrant that doesn't have the benefit of a nonprofit or to pay a private attorney having to navigate this system by themselves. It's just impossible, and it just creates insane backlog in the agencies, in the courts, and they're not going to have the resources to be able to navigate this.
Nancy, if I could just add one thing to what Gisselle said, I'll be brief here. I also want to hone in on this term criminal activity or have a criminal record, because you could have a criminal record for something that's not a dangerous or violent crime. And that's never talked about in the nuance of who's actually being deported. And the more that states like Florida pass laws like SB 1718 to criminalize people for everyday things like coming in with a certain driver's license from another state that they thought was going to be accepted, the more that we are criminalizing people for things that really in the past were not crimes. And I mean, you could also get into the whole fact that immigration itself wasn't even really criminalized until the 80s federally as well. But the problem is when we say that, you have to also understand that last year, according to ICE, nearly a third of those deported did not have criminal records, so at least a third. So that's a significant number, but every time you hear these talking points mentioned, it's, oh, we're only focusing on the criminals, we're only focusing on the criminals. So I just wanted to provide some context to that term as well.
Can you also provide a little context to the impacts of, media coverage on these really high-profile cases involving immigrants? I mean, there have been, let's face it, some really horrific cases in the news and cases that have been followed through the court system. Do you feel like the public perception is to paint a wide brush? I can open that to anyone who wants to answer that, but that also adds to the complexity, right, when you talk about the issue of folks facing criminal charges.
Do you mean in terms of painting immigrants in the media and talking about them negatively, and like saying, okay, pointing out when they've committed crimes or violent crimes?
How these high-profile cases have really kind of, again, the perception that these cases have now set in our country.
Well, as a member of the media, with all due respect to you, I do. It's okay. I do think, especially at the local level, a lot of these stories are fed by law enforcement and the police community, and so sometimes there is an agenda that is being pushed. But it's also interesting that in a lot of the times that we've talked about bills like SB 1718 and other, the sanctuary cities ban in 2019, there's always this one terrible case that is blown up in the news, and it starts getting recirculated among more conservative people who want stricter immigration laws, and they use that, but then it's cherry picking, so they ignore everything else, and we don't talk about, well, actually, how many of these violent crimes are committed by people who were born and raised in America? So let's talk about that. But it's hard to have that nuance in today's day and age, and people use it to their advantage for sure.
Felipe, did you want to add something quickly?
Yeah, so actually Texas collected data on criminalization and also the number of non-citizens who were charged with a felony, and they have found out that U.S. citizens are more than 3 times more likely to be the people who are committing these felonies. And the reason why is simple, because immigrants are afraid of the police. Period. When I was a kid, my family would instill in me keep your head down, don't say much, stay quiet, keep with the law, because they didn't want me to get deported. That's what it is. So that's really the truth of the matter. I would say this in a really funny way. You know, I'm a millennial, so I was scrolling through TikTok the other day, and I saw a comedian, and it was a bunch of brown people, right, watching TV, and then it came on the news, some criminal act, and then everyone started cheering and being happy when they found out that the so-called criminal was actually a white person. Every time we see a crime on TV, the first thing that happens to me, I gasp and I think, oh my God, I hope this is not a person who could be pinged as a way to criminalize an entire community. And that speaks to the racialized nature of this issue, and also some of the healing that we have to do as a country collectively too.
And all communities face that.
That's correct.
One time Felipe said something to me that I really felt it. It's like, as immigrants, we have no room for mistakes.
Yes, this is, sorry. Now I'm
she's
so
the
passionate
timekeeper,
about
not me.
Oh my goodness, I'm
Just keep
sorry.
an eye on her.
Okay, really briefly. I mean, like, I think that having the right to be transformed, to transform and be transformed is a human right. All of us might have a moment in our lives that we might be ashamed of. And yet, we all deserve a second chance. But when you're an immigrant, you don't. The moment that you trip, the moment that you say the wrong thing, the wrong that you show your accent, the moment that they see your name, that could be the end for you.
All right, I want to move on to another pop quiz. Ann Escamani cannot be the only one leaving here with an A+ today. How many of you know what the DACA program is? Okay. How many of you have ever met a DACA recipient? Wonderful. There are
have one right here.
Yeah, I know, exactly. You met one today, so everybody raise your hand. There are more than 20,000 DACA recipients in Florida, and many more who might be eligible, according to the Migration Policy Institute. We cannot talk about this issue without talking about DACA. So Felipe, Alexis, let's talk about it, what it is, first, for folks who aren't 100% familiar with the program, and what are some of the proposed changes that the legislature is considering, particularly with ending in-state tuition for these students who, by the way, are known as Dreamers, for those of you who may not be familiar with the program. Let's talk a little bit more about it. Alexis, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you. So DACA, and the reason we call it Dreamers is because it was based off the proposed federal DREAM Act under the former Obama administration. But DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, basically saying if you came here with a parent or family member before the age of 16, we are not going to punish you. You are still undocumented, but we will allow you, just like similar to TPS, to study here, work here, and stay in the country. But just like with TPS, you have to renew it every so often, and it's always under threat. So it is a temporary reprieve from being deported. So in Florida, as Nancy said, we have at least 20,000 DACA recipients, and there's many more who would be eligible according to the Migration Policy Institute. So in the year that SB 1718 passed, so 2023, the governor had also proposed repealing a 2014 law that allows DACA recipients to receive in-state tuition if they graduated from a Florida high school, within the prior 3 years, or two or 3 years. So the point being, you went to school here, you're part of this community, why would we charge you out-of-state rates? And the alternative is, if we charge you that, you're probably not going to be able to afford it, and you're going to leave the state, and your money and your contributions will go elsewhere. So this was bipartisan, this law that passed in 2014. It was led by then Governor Scott. He still supports it, even though he's not in Florida, our governor anymore, and many conservatives and progressives came together to pass that. So now the threat is, again, just like in 2023, taking that law away completely. And I was just introduced for the upcoming session, SB 90. And, unfortunately, we can't predict what's going to happen, of course, but I do have some concern that it could move, given that Senate leadership has expressed some interest in a similar proposal. So we'll see.
Well, I think you would be remiss if I don't tell a little bit more about my personal story, and then through that exemplify what it's like to live under the yoke of having to pay 4 times as much when your dream is to go to college. I came to the U.S., like I said, when I was 14. I was undocumented for 15 years of my life, and I actually cut my teeth in advocacy working on tuition equity and for the DREAM Act and the For Action for Childhood Arrival. In 2012, I was able to get a work permit, and then through that, I was able to work, a professional job, et cetera, et cetera. And when DOMA was repealed by the Supreme Court, I was married to a U.S. citizen. I became a green card holder. In 2021, I became a U.S. citizen, thanks to the Orlando Center for Justice, who did my application. And who knows, maybe one day I can be lining up just like Anna to say, I'm running for office. What I have to say here is that when people grow up in this country, we are taught that if you work hard, all your dreams can come true. And I worked very hard. I got great grades the whole time. I graduated from high school and I couldn't go to college. Then because I found a way into Miami-Dade College, which is a community college in Miami, I was able to begin and then later on continue to St. Thomas University and finish my degree. But it took 7 years. 7 years. And I used to work at night, cleaning tables, cleaning houses, doing odd jobs, you name it. Simply because at the time, I wanted to be a school teacher. And that dream never came true. Now I guess I'm a teacher through training others. and continue on the legacy that we all have to be on. We all deserve this right to dream and to have the ability to fulfill our full potential.
Alexis, I want to send this back to you. You just mentioned some legislation. Let's talk a little bit more about what you see coming up in the Florida legislature this year in regard to immigration law. Anything that stands out to you?
I wish I had a crystal ball, but I'll just say, based on some of our past fights, McKenna touched on carve out for what was known as the E-Verify provision of SB 1718, which required all employers, private employers to, well, public employers already have to, but so all employers to go through a faulty and error-prone system instead of using a federal I-9 form to verify whether someone is able to work in the country. And so there's various issues with that system. Businesses don't like it, but they ended up getting behind it. And so we're thinking that there might be some carve-outs coming, so some of those industries don't have to suffer as much. So that's one. The in-state tuition concern, as I mentioned. I also really expect further child labor rollbacks to happen. At Florida Policy Institute and our partners were heavily involved in pushing back against that fight, specifically HB 49 last session. And I know that it ended up passing, but we are collectively able to water it down significantly. And there are a lot of big interests and a lot of money and power behind that proposal. And we really expect it to come back because they didn't get everything they wanted when they decided let's let 16 and 17-year-olds work, unlimited hours and overtime during the school year with no restrictions and no breaks. Oh, and let's put them on roofs too. That was a different bill. So that all happened, and so we're expecting some of that to come back. And then one positive thing I will say is, so a lot of people don't know about this, and it is a long-term bill. We call it a messaging bill, so we know it's not going to get passed now, but the idea is to start changing the narrative. It's called the Welcoming Florida Act, and so the Florida Immigrant Coalition, which FPI is a part of, drafted that legislation with some legislators that will be filed again this session, and it would undo a lot of what the bad provisions of SB 1718, but also put forth a lot of the proactive things that we've been wanting over the years to be more inclusive of immigrants in our state.
We are running really low on time, but I want to make sure we get in our last question. So I'm going to ask you guys to, kind of beef up the answers quickly. McKenna, quickly for you. Florida has labor shortages that state officials acknowledge will be painful. Talk a little bit about how business interests like agriculture, construction, what they're doing to get relief. I know it's a big question and we don't have a lot of time, but they're actively doing things.
Yeah, so one thing I came across when I was doing research for the 2024 legislative session was I know the construction industry and probably probably the agriculture industry as well, works with local school systems to create career and technical education programs to help steer young students into these jobs after high school. But notably, trade groups for the construction industry here in Florida, including the Florida Home Builders Association and the Associated Builders and Contractors, similar to the hospitality industry, got behind a bill, as Alexis kind of briefly just mentioned, another bill to roll back child labor law, specifically for the construction industry, to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to work on residential construction sites. It was both commercial and residential, but the Florida Policy Institute and other groups did advocate to eventually water it down pretty significantly. So those are a couple ways that we've seen the construction industry try to fill labor shortages, not just probably exacerbated by SB 1718, but also just an aging workforce in the construction industry.
Okay. All right. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and we're going to move on to our Q&A from the audience. So at this time, we're going to open the forum to league members to ask questions. Gina Hall is at the mic over there to my left to facilitate your questions. Please raise your hand if you need the mic to be brought to you. We'd love to hear from you. And I just want to point out, after Q&A, remain seated for important league announcements. So Gina, we'll give it to you.
Thanks, Nancy. If you have a question, if you could come line up over here, I think it will facilitate moving forward in a much more efficient way. So I'm going to hang on to the mic. I'll share it with you. So, Charlie, what's your question?
Charlie Williams, League member. Nancy, thank you, because it was an education session. And I just have one simple question. Can you point out to a state that is doing it right and has more than 2 immigration courts and doesn't have a backlog of 250,000? So when we talk to others, we can point to a comparable that Florida needs to replicate.
Unfortunately, it's a nationwide problem. So I don't think there's a particular state that doesn't have a backlog or anything like that, because immigration courts are federal courts. They're not state courts. So the backlog is national. I think I read this morning it's about 2 million cases nationwide that are pending in immigration courts.
You know, even though the question of the court is absolutely a federal issue, there are some states that are doing really great things. So I like to point out first California, which is the state, it's a sister state really, you know, and a state that has passed in-state tuition and different measures to support and also protect immigrant workers and families. And also a state that I don't think anyone would guess, Utah, which is actually a Republican state that actually the Essential Worker Act came from. So there are plenty of states both in both sides of the aisle that are doing the right thing, and it's about time for Florida to do the same.
Hi, Maria Sanchez. Sorry. Maria Sanchez, first-generation immigrant and also league member. My question is to all of your organizations or all the work that you've been doing with the impending mass deportation and the community that you work with. Have you guys or has any of the consulates reached out to also work with that community? For example, the Mexican consulate or the Haitian consulate that we have here. Have you guys reached out? Have they reached out? Is there a path to help on both ends?
Actually, we have an incredible, Hope Community Center has an incredible partnership with the Mexican consulate. We have a really incredible LGBTQ plus immigrant program that we do all of our meetings there. And we partner with them in several different ways. So they pay sometimes for legal services. They support Mexican nationals. We are now in conversations with the Brazilian consulate, with the Haitian consulate, and the Colombian consulate, looking for ways in which we can mutually partner with each other. These consulates exist to protect the rights of the nationals of those countries, so they want to partner with us, and they want to find pathways. So this is the reason why we're reaching out to them. We're creating these new partnerships, but I do want to point out that the Mexican consulate is an incredible friend to all of us.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you guys. Just wanted to ask if you guys could touch on like solutions, what you think our immigration should look like our immigration system should look like, how we can improve it. If you guys can just share some about that, thanks.
Well, we are definitely short on time, so I would say I will just say a couple on the state level, and this is what I was touching on with the Welcoming Act that's going to be filed. Even if we can't legislate, or we shouldn't be legislating who comes in and out of our borders at the state level, what we should be doing is welcoming people in our communities and be as inclusive as possible. So some things like that are things we take for granted. Making sure that everyone who is here, regardless of their status, has driver's licenses. Making sure they can afford tuition, and on top of that, that they can get financial aid to help pay for that tuition, because undocumented people are not. Creating an Office of New Americans that is there specifically to advocate for immigrants like other groups do. And it would also be great if Florida had a Department of Labor, because we don't. So that would be very helpful, because immigrant populations tend to be the most marginalized among the workforce. So those are just a few, but I mean, we could have a whole other panel about that, unfortunately.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions.
Yep.
Yes, my question is for Felipe. You mentioned, you touched on first responders training. How could I find out more information about that?
So tomorrow at 6:30 p.m., tomorrow's Thursday, right? Tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. at our 800 South Hawthorne location, actually Gisselle is gonna be there, and we're gonna be training folks on how to teach immigrants about the Dignity Plan. So you can join by coming tomorrow, or you can come talk to me. Danila is here too, to get some information on how to get involved with the Hope Community Center.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last question.
Hi, Esther Rodriguez. I serve at Hope Partnership in Kissimmee, where we work alongside our neighbors who are experiencing poverty and homelessness. And there are so many intersections to homelessness and this conversation around immigration. The one that stood out to me today in our current state is that of policing, right? I was resonated the idea of anticipating mass detentions versus mass deportations and the fear around policing. And I just have curiosity if you could say more about what normal persons or us in this room how we might engage that conversation around policing.
I think you need to go to Hope's training tomorrow. Tomorrow, right? Because that's definitely going to be to have partners and to teach the community how to react to it. But definitely the police is probably going to be deputized almost as immigration officers, and the communities are going to be afraid. So we really need to arm ourselves and arm the community to react to this issue.
Yeah, and just briefly, also Florida Immigrant Coalition has a hotline where immigrants call in, and they have Know Your Rights trainings. They've been doing that for decades, and they also work with groups like the ACLU to get the word out and translate into different languages as well. So definitely check Florida Immigrant Coalition, FLIC, out as well, and refer people that you meet to them.
Okay, we have a couple more minutes, so time for one more question.
And thank you all for very valuable information. Can you clarify a little bit about HB1 visa and why it's not the solution?
Juicy
I'm
question.
not touching that one.
Go ahead, Alexis.
No, I'm not touching.
Oh, okay.
I'm a state policy expert,
So
not federal.
HB1 visas are essentially a visa that allows some industries to bring people from other countries to work. What is the problem here? The problem is then your legal status becomes connected to your workplace, meaning that you could get abused, things can happen to you at the workplace, but you're never going to say anything. Because if you do, by getting fired, that immediately means getting deported. So, and that's really at the crux and the problem with the HB1 visa, in my opinion.
Thank you so much. Nancy, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. It kills me that we didn't get to our last question as we're out of time, because that question highlighted that the League of Women Voters of Orange County has nearly 800 members, many of whom are active in the community. And the question was, how can they help? And I just want to say that you've all helped by being here today and by learning more and being part of this conversation. And you can continue to help by sharing what you heard here today. So neighbors, friends, dinner party, wherever you go, go this weekend, talk about this event, talk about the folks up here, look up McKenna's work and her story. You can continue to help in very impactful ways. And that also includes finding Felipe after this and learning more about the Hope Community Center and all of the work that everyone here does and finding ways to help. There are many, right, Felipe? I don't have to tell you that.
If I could just say that if I could request for everyone here to contact Sheriff Mina and Mayor Demings and actually tell them that we are 321,000 immigrants who live in this county. We're not just a number. We are lives, we're people, we're families. And we need them to actually stand strong against this wave. But if they don't hear from people like you, unfortunately, they're just going to comply. And that, in my opinion, goes against the very moral and ethics of the kind of community that I know we belong to.
Thank you. Can we just give a round of applause to our whole panel and thank them for being here, for their time, for their insights, and for the work that you do day in and day out. We're going to close now. Please stay seated, though, for a quick announcement from President Reverend Kathy Schmitz. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here with us today.
Okay, thank you, and I'll invite you to go back to your seats if you'd like to. Thank you so much to Nancy Alvarez for moderating and to all of our panelists. We have gotten a great, we have gotten a great overview of the landscape at many levels, but particularly here in Central Florida. I know we all learned something new. I hope that you are also inspired to continue learning about this important issue and to monitoring it as we move forward through the weeks and months ahead. We do have some calls to action and reminders of upcoming events, because just because the election is over doesn't mean we're done, okay? So first of all, how many of you have a standing request for a vote by mail ballot? Okay, how many of you have also re-upped it in the last 8 days? Okay, if you didn't just raise your hand, you don't have one. They all expired on December 31st. So please, we have a leaguer coming into the supervisor of elections role. Yeah, and one of her staffers, another leaguer, Scott, is here today. So make sure, especially if you live in Belle Isle, Maitland, Ocoee, Windermere, or Winter Park, you have March 11th elections coming up. Okay, please visit our tables. You heard from the Democracy Project earlier. We also have a table from the Peace and Justice Institute, PJI, and they're doing a common read on the book Together. I would recommend we all take a look at this book. It's about the epidemic of loneliness and the need for connection in our society today. Please stop and see them on the way out. Okay, and please do our survey. We love to learn from you and improve. Upcoming events: virtual new member welcome January 14th at 6 p.m. Eatonville MLK Parade, January 18th, 2 p.m. You can sign up on the League volunteer page. Our DEI Social Justice Book Club is meeting on the 21st of January at 7 p.m. The book, and I think it relates to what we were talking about today, Say the Right Thing, How to Talk About Identity, Diversity, and Justice. They welcome new readers. I've got a couple of things. I am going to be learning more about the state process, and I'm going to be doing little mini sessions for you. Please check the newsletter for that on how our state league works, and then in February I'll do how our national league works, because we are part of a really awesome nationwide network, and it's good for us to know how we fit in that. And January 25th, Saturday morning, you want to be at the community center in Winter Park, because we're going to have our annual planning meeting, and it is not going to be business as usual, because we have to figure out what we are going to do with our 800 members in 2025, because there's a lot of work to be done, and we need to figure out how to be the most effective league that we can be. So please join us, and here's your big opportunity. Ready? Don't you all like to make somebody else's day? Don't you like to make people happy? Good. Make our planning team happy by registering for this event. See, that's so easy, and you can do that on your phone or when you get home. And there is no Hot Topics overtime today, and our next Hot Topics is going to be on February 12th when we honor Black History Month. Please be sure to register early if possible because we expect it to be at capacity. And with that, we are adjourned. Thanks for being here.